Yeah, I'm the Upper Street Wizard. And again, it's not hard to be the best player on this street when it's all farmers that live here. You know what I mean?
The actual best missile command player that we knew of in 1984. His name is Roy Schultz. And I talked to my buddy Jeff Peters that was actually at the Guinness contest back in 1984 in San Jose, and he said he was the best missile command player he ever met.
Yeah, and that was the first, well, the results of that contest were the first year that video game scores were recognized in the Guinness Book of World Records. And for, for 3 years after that, the Guinness still printed them, which was great. Great recognition for the skill of, people playing this stuff too. I mean, I was really cool, hey, to be in the Guinness Book of World Records. I still tell people that today, and it's like, oh wow, you're in the Guinness Book, that's so cool. I'm like, yeah, but it's for video game scores. Like, no, that's really cool. Well, I mean, you had both sides of it. You had the people that really, loved the competition and loved the games, which made it socially acceptable. But then you had, like most new things, you had the flip side of, it's melting people's brains, it's making people aggressive, people are selling drugs in arcades, it's going to be the demise of society, all that stuff was going on at the same time.
I actually first met Roy in January 14th, 15th at Captain Videos in Los Angeles in 1985. At that point in time, I didn't realize really what he was famous for. I knew that he could play Missile Command, but I didn't realize how obsessed he was at Missile Command. I actually was there in 1985 at Johnny Z's for the Guinness contest, and there were players coming from all over North America. Walter Day was there, Bill Mitchell was there, Chris Ira was there, Steve Harris, Greg Zakundiak, Darren Harris, Tom Masaki, all these different players were coming from all over North America. The reason why so many players were coming, it wasn't necessarily come to the Guinness, but the following weekend was going to be the World Championship Ironman contest where you could actually win $10,000 if you could play a video game for 100 hours. So Roy Schultz showed up. He showed up in Victoria. He rode the bus from LA or from wherever he was in Southern California. Talk a little bit about your impressions when you met Roy Schultz when he came up there to play Missile Command.
I'm not really sure what to expect. Everybody called him Popeye because he had these huge forearms. forearms. And so he comes in, and that's the only thing that you can see is this person walking in and just these massive forearms that were the size of my thighs. It's the strangest thing you've ever seen. But he was a nice enough guy. I mean, it's my interaction with him. He was a nice enough guy. He just it was just, these forearms. You couldn't get over the size of these forearms.
And he made it there for the Guinness contest. And the Guinness contest was on the weekend, 28th of June to the 30th. And the way that worked was that whatever location that was picked for the contest, they actually had referees or volunteer or associates from Twin Galaxies to validate the scores. The irony is that the Missile Command setting for Guinness was 6 cities and no bonus cities. At that time in the 80s, like, Missile Command wasn't in too many arcades, and that was one of the problems that we had later on, like for contests in 84 and 85 for Guinness, or even as late as 86, that stuff like Popeye or Pac-Man or some of these older games, or like Space Invaders, where people had long since got bored of playing them, they didn't have them in the arcade. So basically some of those records were quite low and some of them were stagnant because you couldn't find an arcade that actually had the game. So when Roy showed up, the Missile Command wasn't there for the Guinness event. It was actually there for the Iron Man contest because Roy was supposed to be coming there to compete along with some of the other video game superstars of the 80s to go for the $10,000 cash prize by playing a video game for 100 hours. Back in 1985, you were the operator known as Pacific Vending Distribution.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about how you were Johnny's game supplier back in those days?
Yeah, we supplied top-notch games. When Blanchard opened, especially.
Yeah.
We supplied, you name it, we supplied it. Whatever games, the latest and greatest, and multiples of it.
And you brought him a Missile Command and Asteroid, some other stuff. And he didn't own the machines, so he didn't have the keys.
Okay, we supplied John with every piece of equipment that he had. Okay, and we never gave him keys to any of them. It was bad enough that we would collect from them and give him, he wanted to keep the coin and give us a check, and chances were that the check would bounce.
The game was never changed onto the 6 cities with no free cities all throughout the contest. There wasn't much Johnny Z could do. Johnny Z was just the arcade owner, but he actually had other people supply his games for him. As June of '85, we knew that Roy never got that score. He was claiming that he got a 1,695,000 point score, and we knew that he never got that score on those settings. But it was such a crazy thing on Sunday night there where he was screaming and hollering and complaining and this, that, and the other thing. Do you remember when Johnny Z, he said, $50 anybody who steal Roy's bag? You remember how Roy had that bag and like it was always in front of the Missile Commander, he kept it with him wherever he goes.
Because he carried around this bag. He had like all his supposedly personal possessions in it. I think he had this little award or whatever. Hi, my name's Roy Schultz. I'm a video game player. So we had, me and Johnny Z, we got a plan to take his bag and take it from him because he held on to it like it was the end all be all of his life. So I snagged it, Johnny Z grabbed it, took it, threw it up in the ceiling, and it was gone. He was when he realized it was gone, man, he flipped his lid. It was like Brutus. What is that? What's that? The guy from Popeye.
Brutus.
Brutus. Yeah. He went from Popeye to Brutus in like 3 seconds. Looking for his bag. Who took my bag, man? He says, he thought it was Steve Harris who took his bag. He's like, Steve, I know it was you, man. I'm going to track you down. I'll sell everything I own, just to get my bag back.
He wanted to know where that bag was pretty bad. I'm not sure what was in it, but
He had like 5,000 cash, ID, this notebook with information on everybody there and other people. I guess he was keeping tabs on and stuff like that. And then he got the bag back, whatever like that. But Walter had no arcade, but he was looking for somebody who was willing to spend I think it was like $100 or $1,000 you had to put down for a sports insurance company in order for them to put up the $10,000 prize if someone was able to play a video game for 100 hours under the specific stipulations that the contract outlined.
Well, I remember when I first heard of Twin Galaxies, and saw the scoreboard. That moment in Starship Video, it's like, wow. Okay, people are tracking this stuff. You could be the best in the country.
The game, yeah.
So my impression of Twin Galaxies, it must be this pretty slick, well-maintained, oiled machine, very professional. Yeah. And then once, the first time I met Walter, and then found out what Twin Galaxies was, it's like it was completely shattered, that it was just literally this, fly-by-night duct tape and baling wire thing.
Yeah, no, because that's the thing. The thing he's good at promoting himself. And then Johnny Z came back to the arcade when all this kerfuffle was going on, and Johnny Z kicked him out of the arcade. And Walter said, "Okay, if you just leave, we'll take your score." And it basically was a fictitious score.
Actually, it was even after the tournament was over when the Iron Man had started. Roy kept bugging Walter, from what I understand, for hours and hours. It must have been 2 or 3 hours, and it went on even after the tournament was over and when the Iron Man had started. From what I can remember, Walter finally gave in, said whatever.
Nobody thought after all these years it would be a big deal.
I was playing games when I was in Victoria, but at that time I wasn't really an exceptional video game player, so I had a lot of time to watch other people play, like Chris and Bill and Jeff, and just a lot of people and how they were playing their games. And as most video game players know, the more you watch other people, the better you get, right? So I watched Roy a lot. I got to know Johnny Z very well. Became pretty good friends with him. I talked to him even years and years after the tournament. When we found out that Roy had submitted his score with the settings of 6 cities and the score that he said that he did get, it kind of clicked in my brain that machine was never set for 6 cities. And bonus, because it did have bonus, and it wasn't set just for 6 cities.
That was one of the big anxieties that Walter had when we started Twin Galaxies back up again and players were supporting it through the internet. He was afraid that Roy was going to find out about this and he was going to have to deal with this stuff because Roy had sort of become obsessive. One of the ironies about Roy's story that most people don't know is that in the 85, 86 Guinness Book of World Records, he actually was the first person that was put in the Video Game Hall of Fame. And no one really knows that story except a few of us that were around, and Walter can tell you, but he won't tell you the whole truth. Roy was already promised to be in the Hall of Fame at that time. Before he even tried to play Missile Command and claim this fictitious score that he got, what he did was he harassed the guys at Guinness and said, okay, if I get the guys from Twin Galaxies, Steve, Bill, and Walter to sign a piece of paper saying I'm worthy to be in the Hall of Fame, will you put me in your book and be the first person in the Hall of Fame? So what happened was, he rode the bus, he went to Kansas City where Steve lived, he camped outside Steve's house and he harassed Steve and said, like, if you don't sign this piece of paper, I'm going to camp out here and I'm going to harass you. Steve's living at home with his parents in the basement. He's like maybe 19 years old, like still a teenager. And here this, 20-year-old man, like, standing outside his house waiting and harassing him and saying, sign this piece of paper or I'm not going to leave till you do it. And so Steve signed, and after that he went up to Fairfield, Iowa, where Walter was camped out.
Welcome to Video Game News Update. I'm Walter Day at the Twin Galaxies International Scoreboard.
He actually went to the Golden Domes where Walter was meditating, and he basically was harassing the security guards there at the dome where Walter was meditating, screaming for Walter, come out, come out. Finally, after all this kerfuffle, Walter is embarrassed, and he signed the piece of paper saying that he was worthy to be in the Hall of Fame. And then he went down to Florida. He tried to get Bill Mitchell to sign, and Bill said no. What he did was, he rode back up to Ottumwa on the bus, and he contacted the mayor of Ottumwa and harassed the mayor and got him to sign a piece of paper saying he should be in the Hall of Fame. So then he goes back to Guinness and he says, well, I got 2 of the 3 signatures and I got the mayor of Ottumwa to sign, will you put me in the Hall of Fame? Because he felt the Missile Command achievement on a video game was the best thing in the world or whatever, and he wanted to be recognized for. So in order to do this, he actually contacted Guinness and harassed Guinness to try and make this category be created for him so he could be honored as such. Guinness relented, Walter relented, and you see Roy's picture in the Guinness book from 1986.
Mr. Awesome is my nickname as a professional video game player. I've been the world champion in the Guinness Book of World Records since 1983, and no one's ever beat me on my specialty Missile Command. And as a result, I received the nickname Mr. Awesome, and I've been using it ever since.
They mentioned Phil Britt and they mentioned Don Nauert, and basically Walter never really thought that through. He just put people's names in and whatever like that at the time, and just to make it look like it wasn't all Roy's initiative, as if Twin Galaxy was behind us when they weren't. I was at a meeting with some of the guys from Guinness, or one of the technical guys from Guinness, when we were in Sweden. We were joking about that. Roy is infamous for being just one of these crackpots that is constantly harassing Guinness, trying to be put in the book for something to be made famous for. Constantly trying to draw attention to himself for some kind of recognition because he, to be worthy of something or whatever. We called him Popeye. Like, he was all, hyped up on steroids. He was a massive guy. We were all skinny teenagers at that time, but Roy was a big man, and he looked like Popeye. He wearing a toque, bald head, white t-shirt and jeans, whatever, and wore a Siemens peacoat or whatever like that. So we just called him Popeye, and it was funny, man. We played a lot of jokes on him while we were there and gave him a hard time. But after all the shenanigans that happened from the 80s and Walter trying to pretend that he's never lied or is never wrong, he accepted that score of the 1,695,000 from Victoria. No one really thought anything. Like, we were all kids, and I'm sure Walter never thought that would come back to haunt him. But Roy's claiming that he did it, and then he deserves all these new accolades now that the Twin Galaxies scoreboard was back up. He just would not stop. What we did was we actually contacted Johnny Z.
I had called Johnny and had asked him about that. He said that no, he said that was never set. Those weren't the right settings. He said it was never set that way. He said because the game was, he never owned the game, he never had the keys for it, and the game was supplied by operators out of Vancouver, which was Pacific Vending. To verify that, because I'm an operator now. Like, I have a route and I operate video games and stuff. So, and I dealt with the guys from Pacific Vending, and I know them, Sam and Carl Fetter. I had called them and spoke to them about that, and they actually remembered it very specifically, that when they did deliver the games there, that they remembered that the game would never ever have been set like that. They never gave the keys to Johnny, so the settings weren't set that way.
But we contacted him in an email. We asked him some questions to find out exactly what happened, and and he actually said, "Yeah, I remember those days. Some of those days were the best days of my life, and I remember exactly what happened." Johnny said, "Yeah, you're right. No, it never happened, and Walter's not telling the truth about that situation." We contacted Carl Fetter, which was the gentleman who supplied the video games for Johnny Z's back in the 80s, and he explained, well, there's no way he would have given Johnny Z the keys for the arcade games at that time. That the arcade was making so much money, and that
The reason we weren't pushing him, the place was doing so well that we knew he was good for it, and he was paying interest on it.
that was the agreement, that they had a certain split, but he was the one, he sent his representative over from Vancouver to come cash out the machines. And so that when Johnny Z had the machine brought over for the contest, and it wasn't just Missile Command, they brought over an Asteroids for Mark Basabi on the Iron Man, they bought a Niblu over and some other games that people wanted to play, to go for world records and play at the Iron Man. So it wasn't as if Roy was the only case. They had to change the dipswitch settings for this guy to be able to play properly, to be able to go for the world record. And because you had the keys, Johnny didn't, you're not going to bring a game over from Victoria and the kids there, but they're not giving him the keys because it's your machine.
Right.
And then you're bringing it back because it doesn't make money on the floor. Twin Galaxies Intergalactic Scoreboard started back up in 1997, 99, around that time. Someone actually saw one of these Guinness scores, and we actually had a player that was really quite remarkable, because it's not so much that Roy couldn't play. Roy could play, but he was just so obnoxious and so irritating and so self-absorbed and narcissistic that he was hard to tolerate. When we found out about a gentleman that potentially could have broken that score that had been sitting around for a long time, we were all happy and ecstatic, because we really wanted Roy not to have the high score anymore, because we were just tired of all of his bullshit. Tony Temple came on the scene with this new record score.
I played Missile Command for about 2 years in my teens, sort of 14, 15, 16, and then never heard hide nor hair of the machine for the next 20 years. And then, so I did a search on the web about, so what's the high score, and discovered this thing called tournament settings, which I'd never heard of before. Saw this score, 1.69 million, and thought, well, I got the manual out, adjusted the settings, including the trackball settings, Dwayne, as you know, and started gunning for the score. And I think I got kind of 300,000 on my first go, and thought, well, this is clearly doable, and just kept playing. Now, the score, I wasn't there. Did he do it? Did he not? I guess on the balance of probability, he probably didn't, based on all the evidence and what all you guys are saying. But I have to thank the situation, I think, because I would have quite happily got 450,000. I thought, what a great score! Submitted it on the world champ. So, in a perverse way, I kind of have to thank Roy for kind of being persistent and getting his score continually listed, because it gave me a massive target to actually gun for.
And at this time, we didn't realize and understand all the different variations of manuals and dipswitch setting problems and trackball settings that the history of the game had. And Twin Galaxies really had no knowledge of that and really couldn't track it. It was the best we could do as hobbyists, but it wasn't something that was so professional and scientific, and that would come back to bite us, because Roy was just vigilant, saying, that Tony got this score and Tony never did it on the right settings, and we really never thought about it or really had the resources to investigate exactly whether that was true or not.
I'm going to do it in front of everybody, and in addition, I will play the game at a higher quality of play than Tony Temple does. All of those things.
Right.
And I went and did exactly that.
Right.
In front of witnesses and on film. Okay?
Hold on.
Now let me tell you
Don't
how
we have a
let me
film?
finish like I let you finish.
I knew back then, even though we'd never heard of Twin Galaxies, I knew I was pretty good at the game compared to the other guys in the arcade. And for me, it was, I've kind of paid the money for this machine. It's now in my house. I'm going to beat the world record. And it was nothing more than a tick in a box. Yeah. And then I started getting emails from this guy, and I tried to reason with him and kind of calm him down and kind of, don't involve me. If you've got a beef with World Today, you need to speak to him. Don't speak to me. But World won't speak to me. Well, what makes you think I've got any influence over World Today or Twin Galaxies? I happen to live in England, but that doesn't mean to say I know who they are. I know nothing.
I'm not done yet. You wait till I finish.
Roy, I can't hear you.
Wait till I finish. Wait till I finish.
Just keep me out of it. And he kept going on and on. I thought, the only way I'm going to shut this guy up is to just do his score. So the motivation turned from just kind of, I just want to kind of tick that one off and say, I'm the World Missile Command Champion, to kind of, I just want to shut this guy's face up. And the only way I'm going to do it is either go and punch him in the face or just beat his score.
The complaint was noted, but it never really got looked into. So Tony was the new world record champion player from England, and we were happy that someone had beat Roy's score, and Roy never really came out to try and beat Tony's score. So Tony got this notoriety for being the Missile Command champion.
But you see, for everybody here has a go at Roy. But you know, for all his faults, there's kind of something there. I feel quite sorry for him.
I met Tony many times, and I think Tony is a pretty good player, a great player. And I interviewed him and I asked, when you're getting your machine and you're playing your game, and it's one of these things where you don't really know or don't really remember, and if nobody tells you in specific for specific reasons, you wouldn't even think about it. He opened up his missile command machine that he got sent over from the United States to put in his home. On the back, the dip switch settings said the settings that he should play on that were factory were the ones that actually allowed the trackball to play faster than normal setting. And he didn't really know that necessarily. It was through Roy's arguing that we found out that there were these two different settings. We never realized that that was a big issue.
Well, in your manual it says that dip switch number 4 on this particular bank is on. Are you sure that's right?
You never know.
You're just not going to know. And interestingly, if you open up the machine here at FunSpot and you look at the schematic sheet on the back door of the camera, funnily enough, it says exactly that. This is FunSpot's machine. This is the centre of the universe for all things classic arcade gaming, and they have a machine which was released by Atari. They shipped it all the way across America. It came here, and in there it says that the switch should be off. So I've no doubt that there were machines set to on, there were machines set to off. Now, I never even knew what this switch was back in the 80s, and I can't believe for 1 minute anyone else did, because you know, when we were 14, 15, you were just pleased to see a machine. You rocked up, you put your money in the slot, and you started playing, and the trackball was the trackball. I didn't give it a second thought, other than, oh, this one's a little bit quicker than the other, but that could be not just down to the switch position, that could be down to just the age of the machine. It's not been oiled, it needs servicing, whatever it might be.
So after all these years, Tony has been playing on the fast settings on the 6-city with no bonus settings like the Guinness record was, that tournament setting as it's called. He played with the faster dip switch setting for the trackball to move quicker. All the other marathoners were playing on that setting as well, and players like Bill Carlton and I think Steve Askey, I think is his name, from Canada, and this gentleman.
His name is Victor Sandberg, and he's from Sweden.
Broke the marathon record. Everyone's playing on this faster trackball setting.
It's probably worth pointing out at this stage that there are two versions of the game. One is marathon settings. So the world record I got took me 3 hours, and some people think that's crazy to play a video game for 3 hours.
After all the research that I've done, I've actually found out two things. There was actually a wrong version of the game that the programmers fixed the bugs on the marathon settings of Missile Command, so that you don't have the 800,000 point bug where you get all these bonus cities.
At 810,000, the game, how it's been explained to me or how I've read about it, is in one of the registers, the wrong number gets loaded in, and you get 176 bonus cities, which causes a lot of trouble, because that can put you at, that 253 through 3 range. Then you don't get any more cities from between 800,000 and a million. So let's say you had 100 cities going into 810, plus 176 equals 276, minus 255, now you have 20 cities, and you're not going to get a bonus city until you reach a million. So we started keeping track of that also. But then, randomly, the 0x board happens. And the 0x board is board 255. So you get to play board 255, and everything is worth 255 times its normal value. But you don't get to play board 255 or 256. It just plays out. We also had to keep track of what wave he was on, because if you reached 810 and the 0x board all at the same time, you had a tremendous amount of possibility of just a reset.
When you roll the levels over from 256, it actually goes to 0 and gives you all this multiple points that gives you extra cities and just screws everything up. Something happens where the memory locations aren't able to handle that number getting close to 512, over 512, and it just resets everything and resets the game. So they figured out that they'd have to do the math to be able to keep track of when their cities were rolling over, how many cities they had, so they could keep the game going. And the dude from Norway did it no problem, and he's done it more than once, which is crazy. It's just amazing, his performance.
One of the ROMs was a different chip to the existing ones in there, and it had revision 3 on there. And as far as we know, there's only been 2 revisions of Missile Command, and when he dumped the code off of this chip, and I believe you can find it on MAME now, there is a version 3. It was a release by Atari, and it does correct the 810,000 point bug. And I know that because I played the game through out of interest, and I have the chip at home.
Just offhand, like I can think of, Sinistar had the 255 men you could get. Mr. Do had one of those.
Just about every game had some way to do it.
Some crazy bug where you get free men, or even now that we find out the programmers put Easter eggs in all this stuff we never knew. But if you figured this out and you got an advantage.
I remember going to one arcade convention. 720 was just released. You know, I was talking to the programmer of it, and I was showing him, you know, look at all these bugs and stuff in here. I remember he just kept saying, "Well, don't do that. Stop doing that. You're not supposed to do that." I'm like, well, you're not supposed to leave this in the game. And it's just, you know, it's just funny. You know, we find this now, no matter how much we test a game, you know, before we manufacture it, we still don't get everything. Yeah, it's physically impossible, especially with how big the games are now. Let alone, you know, some of these that took, you know, 1 or 2 people to build start to finish. You didn't have teams and teams and teams of, you know, QA or people testing it, you know, for months before letting it out. You know, you got UL listings on the electronics. Okay, it's not going to burn down someplace, but you didn't have that amount of testing on the quality of the software.
So I'm not saying that their performances aren't incredible, but what I am saying is that they're playing on the wrong dip switches, in my opinion, from all the research that I've done from the Atari manuals. Well, at least I got a freaking free city. Can't control the fucking thing. So that's 4 on. Switching it to 4 off. There we go. I mentioned this to Tony, and I mentioned this to a couple other people, that a number of arguments were made, and people say, well, you're supporting Roy's argument, or you know, or you're on Roy's side. It's not so much I'm on Roy's side. The game needs to be played the way it was intended.
The interesting thing about marathon settings is once you become pretty good at missile command, you can just keep playing, because it just becomes about getting to the next bonus city, the extra bonus life, which is applied every 10,000 points. And if you can get through a wave and you can survive it, it doesn't matter if your city's gone, because the bonus city kicks in and you just continue the game. So for me, really, marathon settings becomes a test of endurance. It's not so much a test of skill.
My arguments for the game playing properly are simply that the trackball moves the way that the cursor does in the attract mode. That if the trackball was moving twice as fast on the attract mode when they changed the settings, and I think, well, there was a aberration for the game to be played that way, but that's not the way the game plays in the attract mode. It's like, my example is Turbo Pac-Man. You know, Turbo Pac-Man or Turbo Miss Pac-Man plays that fast in the attract mode and plays that fast in the game, because that's the way the game has been programmed to, and it's a different code. When you speed the trackball up on the big screen, it moves fast and you can manage it. But there was actually an Atari memo that came out when they made a mistake when they were sending these games up from the factory on the wrong settings. When you're playing the small screen, that cursor moves so fast because the screen is so small, it makes it very hard to play. So they actually had to send out an apology notice to all the distributors and to all operators that had the game sent out on that wrong setting. So that was part of my investigation, why I wanted to check into this, to find out if there was anything said about proper dip switch settings. And so they sent out a memo to correct the manual, and they actually said, this is the proper setting for playing with the small trackball, and this is the proper setting for playing with the bigger trackball. And the bigger trackball and the smaller trackball play slower. And so that's why I take the stand on that issue the way that I do.
The world record I have is based on missile command tournament settings. Tournament settings is exactly the same machine, but you don't get any bonus cities. So what that means is the game is not about just getting to the next wave in order to earn your next bonus city so you can carry on playing the game, or you get the 6 cities. Once they're gone, they're gone. So your game needs to be really, really tight. One mistake and the game's all over. It's extremely frustrating. The guy at the bottom, oh God, Roy Schilt, Mr. Awesome, to you and me. Roy Schilt is the original Missile Command tournament settings world record holder. He held the record from 1984 up until 2006 when I took his score away from him. Roy is an interesting individual. He has this persona
Mr. Awesome. And he's very vocal about the world of world records and my score and his score and how he's still the true champion and I'm not really the champion. I first came across Roy when I first visited America, and we turned up at this large arcade and guys were coming up to us and saying, "Oh, hello, nice to meet you." And this guy came up to us and he said, "Oh, you must be Tony Temple." I said, "Yeah, hi, how are you?" And shook his hand. And he started talking and he explained his name was Larry and he was just passing and he didn't really know anything about video games, but he thought we'd come and say hello. And I thought, well, that's a bit strange. You don't know anything about video games, but you're coming to say hello to me and you know who I am. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but it turns out Larry was a private investigator that Roy had hired, sent him over to Boston where we were, and he got him to scope me out, I suppose, take my photo from a distance with a zoom lens, to serve me with papers and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I've yet to meet Roy, but I'm quite sure one day it's going to happen, and we'll have a head-to-head, and it'll be a lot of fun. That is if he's not shot me in the head first.
Do you say Missile Command or Missile Command? What do you play over there in Britain?
We play Fuck You, Dwayne. That's what we play.
So it was about 2009, I believe. There was another player that came on the scene that was playing on the 6-city, no bonus city tournament setting. His name is Jeff Blair.
My name's Jeff Blair. I'm from Turner, Maine, and I play Missile Command. My highest score is 1,910,000.
So about how long does that take?
That takes an hour and 15 minutes.
So you did that here at the Fun Spot?
Yes, I did. On April 4th, 2009. Upper Street Wizard. I'm a pinball player, and I made up that name as a player name as a joke. Like I say, it's just the street I live on, Upper Street. So I'm the US Wiz.
So what happened was Jeff Blair came on the scene and he submitted a score. This is when Dave Nelson was the president of Twin Galaxies, or the chief scorekeeper at Twin Galaxies. Dave was telling Jeff that, you know, there shouldn't be any problem taking your score. That's a hard game. Like, people don't realize how fast it is.
It's hard. It's hard to learn the controls and get used to the controls, you know? That's the hard part. So it's time to play now, and I'm ready. On June 14th of 2008, I got a 1,033,000. That was my first million-point game on Missile Command. And if you look in my book here, my notebook, the rest of that year in 2008, I only have 4 other scores over 1 million points.
Wow.
So I didn't progress much through that period. You know, I only got to, I didn't even reach 1,200,000. And I think the reason I was getting stumped there is because at 1,183,000, you're into the intensified missiles now. So it's hard to take your skill level from reaching 1 million to going to 1,000,004. That's a big jump in Missile Command. It's a very big jump, because you've got to go through those about 20-25 waves of intensified missiles. You can see I start hitting 1,000,003 at the beginning of 2009. I'm hitting 1,000,003. Still, through the first couple months of that year, not really getting anything better than that. In March of 2009, I hit 1,000,005 for the first time, 1,005,22.
Wow.
Okay, at home I didn't improve on that. I went to Fun Spot to face Tony Temple again that June. That would have been in 2009. I went 3 weeks prior to Tony going, just to practice on the machine that was there. And that's when I did the 1,910, which was amazing because the trackball was pitiful. So that's probably the greatest score I've ever scored, considering what I was up against.
But what ended up happening was he never recorded the board in continuity with his gameplay, because his computer camera cord unplugged of all things.
I've got the highest score in the world on that setting. It's not recognized, the 1,910. I had 2 players watch the game play out, so I do have witnesses to the game.
Wow, that's amazing.
2 players saw it.
It's pretty obvious to tell whether the trackball is playing slow or fast, and at that point that wasn't even an issue. So it was later or in that event there, you played Tony head-to-head at that point as well?
I did. But yeah, you know, I got to know Tony a little bit, and he's a great guy. He's really shared his strategy, his whole story with me, and I've shared my story with him about stuff, and I'm sure our friendship will be, and our relationship will be just, you know, one of good competition, and that's all I want. Yeah. You know, we got these 2 tables behind us here, and I gave him the pick of machines, and he knows how they both play, so I can't be any more fair than that.
That's good.
You know?
You're a bigger man than him, Tony. Is that an advantage?
I played with Tony Temple head-to-head then, and the best I did then was $1,450,000 something. The best I saw him do that weekend was maybe $1,700,000 or $1,800,000.
So he'd broken Tony's score, and they ignored it. And they said they couldn't accept it. And they there for 3 or 4 months before they even said anything and letting him know. And then what happened was, within that 4-month period, someone must have told Tony, and then Tony broke that 2.4 million score on the faster dipswitch settings, and no one even knew anything about Jeff. And I thought, well, that was pretty crazy. That wasn't right.
Make no mistake, Tony Temple is, as far as missile command players go in the world, he is the smoothest player in the world. He makes this game look easier than anyone else does. I think in part due to the fast cursor and his his complex single fire approach to the game. My approach to the game is very different from his. I have to go more about screening things and firing multiple shots. I don't have the speed to cope with just single firing everything. That strategy will not work on the slow cursor. Tony Temple's strategy will not work playing with the slow cursor. If it will work, I'd like to see it. He can demonstrate it and show us how that works.
It's not that Tony's responsible for the stuff that Twin Galaxies does, but there's something here where, you know, you have to have some kind of fair play, or even acknowledge other competitors and acknowledge what they do and how they play, and not just, you know, sort of take the limelight all to yourself.
The guy on the right here, this is a guy called Jeff Blair. He's a very, very good tournament player. He's currently in second place, scored just under 2 million points. Jeff plays extremely well. I've played with him head-to-head. He's a really nice guy, and he's a great player.
I didn't really know anything about Jeff, but I'd met him and interviewed him and found out his story, and I started investigating this stuff. It was at that point, well, talk about your first meeting with me when I interviewed you and Tony at the Fun Spot talking about Missile Command.
I didn't know who you were. You were just a guy with a camera to me. So I knew nothing about you or your background. I just was more than happy to talk to, you know, my approach to it all is I'm more than happy to talk to anybody really about Missile Command, and you know, to me it's all fun. It's just for fun. That's what the game's about.
Over the years, Roy had become friends with Jeff because Jeff plays on the same settings as Roy. Roy has defended Jeff and Jeff's skill, yet at the same time Roy is jealous of Jeff because Jeff is a far better player than Roy. Roy is a good player, but Jeff is a better player, and he is the best Missile Command player in the world as far as I'm concerned. He plays on the proper settings, which the programmers in Atari would agree with. What happened was, because they never accepted his score, he kept getting drugged through all the stupid procedure and bureaucracy and politics of Twin Galaxies, the way that these crazy so-called professional referees or certified or expert referees, you know, invalidating this stuff. And when I found that out, I thought, well, this is ridiculous.
My take on Walter Day was he seemed pretty genuine when I first met him, when he was trying to encourage me to be a competitor to Tony. I saw Walter a year later at Fun Spot. He showed up in '09. I had just put 1,910,000 on Missile Command 3 weeks before I met Walter. At Fun Spot, I did it on that machine there. I had 2 witnesses to the game. One was Brian Kerr, the other was my friend Mike Haycock, a pinball player. And Mike watched the entire game. Brian Kerr saw the rollover and watched a lot of the play. I mean, for me it was a great achievement, and it was the first time I think Roy Schultz's mythical mark of 1,695,000 had been beaten by a slow cursor player. But the sad part of the whole story is I approached Walter 3 weeks later during the tournament that year, and I just wanted to tell Walter what I had done. And, you know, I wasn't looking for him to verify a score as a world record or something. I didn't even approach him that way. I just approached him trying to explain to him what I had done. And you'd think, being a guy that's the head referee, taking scores, supposed to have, you know, you think in his position, the very least you could do, Walter, would be show interest in players that have great achievements on difficult games. You think you'd show interest, but not Walter Day. What did Walter do when I told him about the 1,910,000 score? In less than 1 second, he went off on some tangent about why he couldn't accept the score, this, that, blah, 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 why it was no good. not once did Walter, the reaction I would have expected would have been, hey, wow, Jeff, that's great. That's a really great score you just did. No one has ever done that. That is fantastic. That was basically, the reaction I thought I'd get from him. I got the opposite. All I got was him shutting me down, telling me why it's no good. That is what I got. And at that point, I pretty well realized with Walter Day, there's another agenda here with this guy. This guy's not about the players. He's not about the scores. It's a political thing. I saw right through the guy right then and there. At that point in time, I realized this guy's not on my side. That's for sure.
And I personally, and I'll tell you right now, anything that I am a part of where I made a mistake or even acted wrong, I would bow humbly asking for forgiveness, because that's just what life's all about. I mean, this is all video games. This is video game scores. I don't even know what to say anymore.
You think if you were a genuine person in his position, you'd be rooting for all players, right? Well, he certainly didn't seem to be rooting for me. So I realized at that point it was going to be an uphill climb.
He got treated shitty, and again, that's not Tony's fault. Because of all the problems with Roy, with Missile Command and his relation with Twin Galaxies, and the fact that Tony was an international player from England that actually gave this idea and this appeal that video games were worldwide and not necessarily North American based or whatever. It was in their best interest to keep promoting Tony and not really be so concerned with Jeff. And I don't think Tony really cared or whatever. Like, it's not necessarily his business. But myself being involved with Twin Galaxies and a referee right from back in the '80s as a kid, and being part of both the United States national video game team and the Canadian national video game team, I've seen a lot of great players and I know everybody. And to me, this just didn't seem right.
10 days later, on June 25th, 2010, I did 2,371,000, and I filmed the entire game and the boards. Now that score there was 7,000 points over Tony Temple's world record. And I went to bed that night thinking I had the world record. But the next day, when I put the tape, when I downloaded everything into my computer out of my camera, I checked everything on the computer the next day. When I played everything back to see that the filming went okay, my camera had unplugged as I was filming the circuit boards when I went into the game. Thus, the boards weren't filmed. And Twin Galaxies never accepted my score. And that was the reason they gave me, that I didn't film the boards. So out of 2 hours of play, recording a new world record, they decided to use the fact that I hadn't filmed the boards. The sad part of the whole story is I sent them a tape 10 days prior that they accepted with a brand new circuit board that I was playing on, whom I got from Sarah St. John, whom Dave Nelson is very familiar with Sarah St. John, knows I bought this board, knows I'm playing this thing right. But once again, with gamers today, video gamers, guilty until proven innocent. So my score was not accepted because I can't prove 100% that what board was in the game. So that was just a world record not given to me.
For myself, just the way that I am, I keep researching stuff to find stuff, and just by serendipity and just by blind chance and blind luck, I actually found some manuals that updated the trackball settings that Atari put out that literally say, these are the proper settings. I informed Tony about that, and he said, well, it means that you're supporting Roy's setting, whatever. And I said, no, it's not that I'm supporting Roy. I said, this is what I found. And Twin Galaxies doesn't care, but I do. I care about the legitimacy of scores, and I care about people getting the proper recognition for their achievements. Twin Galaxies doesn't seem to care, but I do. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew about Jeff Blair and him being the best player, and that, it's no slight against Tony. Tony can play on that particular setting, but, as far as I'm concerned, if Twin Galaxies or anybody wants to record Missile Command scores or track world records, that they need to take seriously my opinion and my research from Atari's material, and that I'm making clear, and with the history of Twin Galaxies and the record keeping, that the proper setting is the trackballs playing slow. They made arguments over the years that, depending on what rollers you're playing with, if they're new or not, that somehow, you can somehow duplicate that 2 times faster of the trackball moving on the screen. And I just like to say that's nonsense. I actually talked to a friend who actually gave me some of the Missile Command notes and stuff. He actually bought all of Atari out and got a lot of old Atari stuff, and he gave me a lot of interesting memos from Atari when they were dealing with this situation, you know, back in the 80s. And, you know, Twin Galaxies wasn't even in existence by the time they dealt with all this stuff. So it's not necessarily their fault, but, you know, I'm bringing it up to date and current, you know, with what we know. We know a lot more now than we actually did back then with all the internet and communication now that we can ask questions and find stuff out. And what the manuals say, they say that the trackball is properly played on the slow setting. The way that the code works is that it's an XY thing, so that when it's set to move faster, originally I thought that on the smaller screens that the game wouldn't be moving slower, but it actually moves even faster because it has to cover that space. It's the 13-inch monitor is used in the cabaret and used in the cocktail, where you have a 19-inch monitor used on the upright and in the cockpit. When it moves fast on the bigger monitor, it's moving faster, and it's not quite as, it's obvious, people can pick it up, but it's like it doesn't make it so erratic that you can't play the game. But when you're playing on the small trackball, the trackball moves so fast in that small space that it really makes it hard to play the game, because it's so sloppy and so fast all over the screen. So that's why Atari sent out that memo and corrected that.
During the same conversation, we talked about, he mentioned the fact to me that he owned a cocktail table, Missile Command. We talked about the trackball speeds and how Tony's fast cursor and I play on the slow cursor. And David Nelson agreed with me that the fast cursor trackball setting doesn't belong on the upright version of Missile Command. It was intended for the smaller trackball. So here you are, you have the head referee for Twin Galaxies, completely agrees with me that my opponents are playing the game incorrectly. But yet they're not accepting the score from me because I didn't film 3 seconds of boards. I've got 2 hours of gameplay that's all there for anyone to see. I've got a score I sent in 10 days prior, 1,874,000, with all the boards filmed correctly, what dipswitch settings I'm on and everything. It's all there. Obviously some double standards going on here with Twin Galaxies about who it is they'd like to see as world champion on this game.
Well, that's a good point there. So, you know, just by the way the game was intended to be played by Atari, that's the reason why I'm taking the stand I am, and it's not any malicious intent towards anybody. Actually, one thing I want to say that most people don't know is that Jeff Blair was actually the first one to roll the levels over at 256 and actually started over. What was the date when you did do your 3,500,000 score?
It was February 28th, 2010.
Okay.
The really cool part about that is, you know, I attained that score, but I was so excited about the score, and right after I had gone over past the 256 mark, the game goes back to starting over. So you're at 1 times. And it's real slow. And I had a friend call me right then. My wife answered the phone, and I took the call while I was playing the game. I had the phone tucked up under my shoulder, in my ear, and I was talking. I was talking to him as I played along, telling him that, hey, I'm at 3.4 million or whatever I'm doing. Now, mind you, no one's ever done it, so I didn't really care how far I go at that point. I mean, I essentially let the game go. I mean, we got a 3.5 million game that could have been 4.5, had I been a little more serious about what to do with that. But mind you, I wasn't filming, so I had no proof of anything. It's my word against everybody's that I did this. The interesting part is on April 4th of 2010, which is like 5 weeks later, I did 2.6 million points, just over 2.6. So by my calculations, I was 100,000 points or so, maybe 4 minutes away from doing it again. I was really close to doing it twice. I didn't want to start filming for a period of a year and capture nothing, because I find the whole filming process to be, you know, not fun. It's not part of what I want to be doing. I mean, when you're filming, you've got to, when you start a game, you've got to really go into, you've got a little regimen you got to go through of supposedly a coin drop and powering up your game. You've got to state your name, where you live, the date, the time. You've got to go through all this stuff, and you know that stuff that all detracts from the fun of just actually playing the game. You know, it becomes more like work, and I don't like that part of it.
Tony knew about that as well, but he never mentioned it. And like they put up some crazy video about his friends put up a video of him on YouTube saying he was the first one, quote unquote, to get to the kill screen or whatever like that, but that's not the proper language anyways. But
I need to check the tape, but by my calculation, that's 4,472,570 points.
I first heard about Bill through high score. I started finding out the machine was resetting on him, so I wanted to find out why. And then, so I went into MAME and I did some save states, checked out what we most likely thought it was, and that was the 256 bug. Well, I found out that it happens at 253, 254, and 255, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that 6-city range. I figured out that if you come to that number one at a time, you'll die, except, coming down. Coming down to 3 cities, you're fine. But if you make a big jump, 80 cities or 90 cities into that range, you're toast. So I figured all that out. We started doing some math on trying to figure out how to prevent all the bugs from happening, the reset.
what were you doing for levels on that game? What do you think the possibility of doing the 256-0 rollover? How does that figure in your achievement?
Well, that's my own sort of personal goal, is to kind of get there and to see what happens. We think we know what's going to happen, so it'll be great to be the first person to get there.
If you can do that, man, that's up there with all-time greatest achievements.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah, I think it's at the moment it's a good target for me. So I mean, my biggest problem is sort of keeping the incentive to play, because as I say, there's been very few people snapping it at my heels. So for me, it's about setting my own sort of personal goals.
You know, just like Bill or anybody, if anybody's going to try and claim some kind of accolades when they know someone else in the community has done it or done something similar or is just as good or whatever, and they try and make the spotlight focus on them, you know, I'm going to call it out. I like Tony, and he's an interesting person, but there's just some certain things there that are just, I guess, sort of taken over people where they I don't know, for whatever reason, they want to be recognized for playing a video game, and, you know, I try and avoid that as much as I can.
You know, all I heard about Roy from players like Tony Temple and other people were that, you know, just stay away from him. You don't want to deal with this guy. That's what I was told.
Myself, Roy Schultz, and Don Nowart and Phil Brett all have Hall of Fame certificates signed by the mayor of Ottumwa, and are more deserving than Billy Mitchell, Paul Dean, and Phil Younger, who are all part of his manipulated scenario because Billy's so jealous. There's a level of difference between people, and Billy's IQ and his sperm count and his playing skills are just too low to master Missile Command. As a result, he and Twin Galaxies have destroyed Missile Command. It's not even in the Guinness Book of World Records, and I have to help the new guy becomes the champion so they'll even recognize the game at all. Just shows you how lame it is.
But, you know, I'm being told this by people that play the game on the fast cursor, and Twin Galaxies people who apparently had bad experiences with them in the past. But I'm a slow cursor guy. It's his mark I've been chasing for 2 years. You know, I want his side of this story, because his side seems to be my side of the coin. I love the game, you know. Some of the players I don't love, but the game I'll always love, because it's always the same, and you can count on, you know, what's going to happen.
Be intense, like use your face too, like.
Santa Barbara.
We need a Mr. Commander.
San Diego.
We need a Mr. Commander.
San Luis Obispo.
We need a Mr. Commander.
San Francisco.
We need a Mr. Commander.
Los Angeles.
We need a Mr. Commander.
Eureka.
We need a Mr. Commander. Nukes on the way. Who can save the day? City's on fire like a funeral pyre. Firecrackers going off from the sky. You know California's gonna fry. Rare for a super missile attack. Death from above, and that's a fact. No need to despair. Smart bombs into crosshairs. Planes bombing overhead. Take cover, or we're dead. Retreat for duck and cover. This could be it, brother. USSR attacking the West Coast. See some Hollywood weenie roast. Death from above and we could be toast. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander. He's the main man. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander. US Wiz. We're gonna save us from the end.
He's gonna save us from the end. He's gonna save us from the end. He's gonna save us from the end. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Commander, he's the main man. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Commander, US Wiz. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, Commander, he's the main man. Mr. Commander, Mr. Commander, US Wiz. Santa Barbara. We got the Missile Commander. San Diego. We got the Missile Commander. San Luis Obispo. We got the Missile Commander. San Francisco. We got the Missile Commander. Los Angeles. We got the Missile Commander. Eureka. We got the Missile Commander. The Upper Street Wiz.
Need another 7,000?
No, it's 144.
144?
I'm looking for 152 right here. See, I'm not there. I'm in between still. I'm getting close, so it's hard. Trust